Can I just quickly get your reaction on the latest news we've heard, and that is that French jets have been bombing military targets on the ground. Well, we're on the understanding that a no-fly zone has been imposed. Isn't that no-fly zone supposed to be stopping any of Gaddafi's jets operating above the Libyan rebels and bombing them from the sky? And yet we're seeing a slight change in military intervention, aren't we, where we're seeing NATO forces actually bombing targets on the ground. What do you make of that intervention?
Well, I think it's been fairly clear from what President Sarkozy said, from President Obama yesterday, that the intention of the countries that are taking military action under the UN resolution is, in fact, to overthrow Colonel Gaddafi's regime. And they wish to do that by assisting the rebels against him on the ground. And so the talk really about a no-fly zone was, I think, rather exaggerated, because Colonel Gaddafi, as far as I can see, has had at most half a dozen aeroplanes in flight. The rebels had an unfortunate plane they put up this morning which promptly crashed. In fact, the whole issue of air attacks is greatly exaggerated. Really, the basic problem has been that, from the point of view of the people who don't like Colonel Gaddafi, the rebels have turned out to be not really very effective as a military force. They're more of a rabble than a rebel army. And Colonel Gaddafi's army has largely melted away. He has perhaps 10 to at most 15,000 soldiers fighting on his side, but he seems to have more people ready to fight for him than are organised to fight on the other side. And that's why NATO aircraft are needed to try and turn the balance of power.
Why has it taken so long, though, for the international community to impose this no-fly zone and indeed to carry out this military intervention, which we've just seen now? Some may say it's too little too late.
Well, I think, after all, let's face it, this issue has only been going on really for 3 weeks or so, so that in some ways it's been very fast action, given that in practice relatively few people have been killed. I think we are talking in terms of a few hundred people, which, by the standards of civil wars and violence going on, for instance, elsewhere in Africa, is still very small. So in some ways the NATO countries have pushed through a resolution quickly. But also, they face the problem that they're trying to do two things: to satisfy other countries in the world that don't want intervention in internal affairs of other countries, whilst at the same time not to allow Colonel Gaddafi to escape from this crisis. Because President Sarkozy in particular, but the British Prime Minister David Cameron, now President Obama of the United States, have all put their personal credibility on the line that Colonel Gaddafi is not going to survive this crisis in power.
Do you think that is the case? Do you think that is the case, that Gaddafi will not escape this now, that his days are certainly numbered?
If the NATO countries use the military power available to them, they can defeat Colonel Gaddafi as America could defeat Saddam Hussein. Whether they can then create peace and stability, let alone progress and prosperity in Libya, as they didn't really do very well in Iraq in 2003, I think that's the bigger question. Colonel Gaddafi's days may be numbered, but whether NATO can achieve a success that will make life better for people in Libya and in the surrounding countries, I'm afraid past performance is not really on their side.
Could there be repercussions, though, retaliation against those countries that have been involved in this at a later stage? Even if Gaddafi does go, could we see some retaliation, terrorism, for example?
Well, terrorism is one possibility. I think the most likely consequence we've already seen from Tunisia is people will say, my life is better secured by leaving and coming to Europe, escaping from Tunisia and now from Libya and coming to Italy, coming to France. And so one of the issues that the governments in Western Europe have tried to preempt is by saying, let's intervene to stop a flow of emigres, refugees. But in practice, people very often decide that in these situations, we saw it in Kosovo in 1999, basically, even a successful intervention messes up the society so much that you're better off to stay or to come to Western Europe. So I think we could see a domestic crisis for some of the West European governments facing a tidal wave of refugees from North Africa. After all, Colonel Gaddafi, when he was still our friend 6 months ago, was busily stopping refugees from Africa coming through Libya to Europe. He's already threatened that he's going to open the floodgates. And even if he falls, I think those floodgates will be open.
Mark Almond, very interesting to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much for joining us here live on RT. Mark Almond, Professor in International Relations, joining us there in Turkey.